What I titled the sermon comes out of the Old Testament lesson, which just struck me. It really struck me. So I wanted to share with you about this conference I went to. So I go to this conference, and I love it because it's just churches kind of like ours and others. It's in my denomination, the Lutheran Church. It's in Missouri, it kind of headquarters in Missouri. These are the churches that we resonate with. We think the same, we talk the same language, we're trying to do the same stuff. So we're not critical on each other, it's not mean-spirited, it's very gracious, it's very cool. So we just simply share things that work. And it's awesome to go in and share things that work. And it's encouraging and full of fellowship. So I've been begging my buddy, so I have my roommate in college at Concordia, Portland. We roomed together for 4 years. We went all over the campus and lived in different spots all over the campus, but he was always my roommate, Calvin. His name's Calvin Watzig. He's a pastor in Tracy, California. So down there, kind of Stockton area. So he's a pastor down there. Dear, dear friend. And since he's moved out of the Northwest, I have not been in touch with him as well. So he was at my wedding, and I was at his wedding, and we were involved together, and we've just been close, but then he moved about 12 years ago. And we haven't been as close. So when this conference rolls around, I'd call him like the last few years and say, Calvin, you got to come to this conference. Come meet me. And he would always give me some excuse and wouldn't show up. So this time I call him and I go, okay, dude, here's the deal. I have a room. It has 2 beds. The conference is free. I paid for the hotel. I paid for the car. And the food is all provided. I said, come. I'm emailing him, texting him. I get nothing, And a half hour later, he calls me up and he says, I bought my plane ticket. So it was awesome. So we spent these last few days together. It was a blast. And what's funny, isn't it funny? I bet you many of you can relate to this. You have friends, old friends, who when you get together, you fall right into that pattern. That pattern when, you had language that you used, certain things. And so much. My friendship with him began 40 years ago. 40 years ago when we were 18 years old. And so it's been a long journey. But the last 10 years, we have not really remained as connected. But it was so interesting because at this conference also, we just know lots of people. Lots of people. It's a small denomination, relatively speaking. And so we know each other. And they would see us together and they'd kind of do a double take because now we're fat and bald. And he's not bald, but I am. And so forth. So, but they would see us together. And it is so interesting because we would fall into those same patterns and same language. And so poor Robert, Rashke, and Ann are with us, and they had to put up with us saying all these dumb inside jokes and then laughing uproariously, and they didn't understand what we're talking about. But it's interesting because you can so quickly fall right into those patterns, right back into those habits and patterns. And that really is what struck me about the Old Testament lesson today. The story of Joseph is very compelling because his brothers sold him into slavery and off he went to Egypt, and he had huge ups and downs at the lowest dungeon and at the highest heights. And when his brothers finally come, because there's a famine in Canaan, there's a famine in Israel, it's not Israel yet, but that area, his brothers come desperately, and they don't know who he is, that he's running Egypt. And so here's this Hebrew running Egypt who used to be a slave, and they show up, and Joseph is sitting there going, they don't know who I am. And so he kind of jerks them around a little bit, wouldn't you? Anyway, so then he shows up, and then finally he reveals himself. And it's this awesome scene where Joseph, in far more grace than he has any requirement to show, forgives them, says, you know what? You meant it for evil, God meant it for good. And God used that. What a mature, wise, faithful interpretation. That's hard for us, isn't it? You meant it. You may have meant me evil, but God meant it for good. That's going to tie into what I want to share with you, something significant today. And so then he says, hey, go back. Is my dad living? And his dad's living. He starts sobbing. Please come back. We'll prepare a land for you. You'll be saved from famine. Bring all your family. Bring everything with you. We'll live here. Now, in the end, they lived 400 years there, many of those years as slaves. And then they have to be rescued from that. But this is how God preserves his promise. keeps that family line alive that the Messiah is going to come through. But he says, please bring my father. But then there's that line at the end. Doesn't that make you chuckle? I'm reading it, it makes me chuckle. And, as you're going, don't quarrel on the way. Because what's he saying? I know how you are. I know how you are. I need you to act differently than that. I need you not to fall into that habit, into that pattern, into that easy routine. I need you to be different than I know you are. And that's really that leads us now to Luke chapter 6. And I'm going to pose a question for us today. It's not fair that I'm trying to broach this topic today in a brief amount of time. It really requires more talking about because I believe it poses a huge, significant question. Because stop and think of the setting for a minute. Jesus is preaching here. It's called the Sermon on the Plain in Luke chapter 6. And it sounds a lot like the Sermon on the Mount. But he gets to this spot, and look at how, did you see how it begins? He starts it off by saying these few words. I tell you, you who are listening to me, right? You who hear me, right? So he's setting the stage. I'm going to give you a speech. Okay, listen up. I'm going to give you some teaching. And now they're all, right? Because Jesus is a huge celebrity now. Some of these people, imagine yourself in the group. Imagine yourself. I hear this reputation. Here's this rabbi from Galilee. He has no background. He has questionable lineage. We don't know what's going on, but I've heard about miracles. In fact, my neighbor saw one happen, and he comes in, he speaks with authority and power, not like our rabbis. I'm going to go listen to this guy. He's going to change my life. I wonder if he is. He's changed so many lives. What will he say? So there they are, and Jesus says, okay, listen up. And the next words out of his mouth have to just flatten them. Love your enemies. That is not how it works, Jesus. Love your enemies. Do good to those who are cursing at you. Pray for those who hate you. If someone smacks you in the face, say, thank you, sir, may I have another. Loan money without the expectation of it being returned. Now, by the way, don't get me wrong on this. I'm not preaching this to you as, okay, now take notes and do all those things. Yes, we could have that conversation. Of course we can. But what is Jesus really doing? He is taking their world, right? He is taking their world and going, poof, just like that, completely upside down. Everything you thought you knew, you don't know. Because in our economy, I'm a dad, I had a son, even with my daughter. Stand up for yourself. Stick up for you. Somebody picks on you, you pop them. You make sure, no, I didn't say that to you. Stand up for yourself. Be bold. Be aggressive. Don't let people just walk over you. Right? Am I lying here? Can anybody relate to this? And so then I have Jesus coming along saying, no, do this. Here's where it comes down to. I want to show you this little video. Ty, you got that one? This is a guy, do you have it? Is it still up on the screen? The red letter challenge one? Oh my. Okay, that's not good. I should have talked to you about it ahead of time. That would have been good on my part. Yeah. I'll tell it to you. So this is a book called The Red Letter Challenge, and our staff is working its way through it. If you remember 40 Days of Purpose, this is kind of 40 days of spending 40 consistent days in the red letters of the Bible, right? You know what the red letters of the Bible are? Jesus' words, right? Jesus' words. So 40 days, the challenge is to walk in, because what does Jesus say in these verses? The person who hears my words and puts them into practice is like the man who built his house on a rock. Not just listens to my words, puts them into practice. See, here's the deal, right? So let's say I say to my son, clean your room. He says, great. Comes back the next day, I say, how'd that go? He says, well, Dad, I studied about it. I determined how much energy it would take and how much work and how many hours it would take in order to clean my room. Here's the plan. I go, okay, let me know in a couple of days how it goes cleaning your room. So he comes back and he says, well, I talked to my friends about it. They also have dirty rooms. And here's a comparison of how these rooms are different and what it requires. I say, okay, I'd still like you to clean your room. Then he goes and he says, comes back another couple of days, say, how did that go? He says, well, Dad, I learned how to say clean your room in Greek and in Hebrew. And so, and then you get the point, right? In the end, I'm going, please clean your room. The person who hears these words of mine and puts them into practice. Lutherans in our tradition are especially good at studying the words, learning what it means, and comparing it with others, and why we're smarter and better. And that's an error. Because in the end, if we do not put the words of Jesus Christ into practice, we have failed what Jesus gave. By his own words. By his own words. And so what's interesting is the video and forgive me, that is not Ty's fault. That is my fault. That is all my fault. So the guy who wrote this red letter challenge is a young man. He's in his 30s, pastor, Lutheran pastor, one of ours in Florida. And he came up, it's very cool, 40 days, red letters. And I tried to go to his seminar. Chuck, you'll get a kick out of this, 3 times. He had it 3 times. First time I go 5 minutes before. Absolutely, people streaming out the door. There's no room. There have to be 60 people in this classroom. Next time I go 15 minutes before. Same deal. I cannot get in the room. Yesterday, I go at 10:30. I go 25 minutes ahead. I would have been there even earlier, except people are talking to me and I can't be rude. So, well, I can be, but so I get there 25 minutes ahead. Same deal. So I never got a chance. I talked to him, personally, because we bought a bunch of books from him and all that kind of stuff because we're hoping to work through it. But he does a video that really kind of, are you familiar with this book? If you're interested in things like what people think of Christians and current trends in Christianity, this book is worth owning and reading and studying. Our staff went through it. I've read it twice. It says, essentially, here's the deal. When people are interviewed about Christians, you know what they say? What words they use to describe Christians today? Judgmental, hypocritical, divisive. In this book, this study, nationwide survey, says, you know what the predominant opinion is of Christians? They are intolerant, intolerant and irrelevant. Those 2 words. And you know what Zach says? It's very powerful. Zach says, when you stop to think of that, that is not just different than Jesus, it's the opposite of Jesus Christ, who is all about grace and mercy and patience and forgiveness, right? Unity, authenticity, transparency. And so it just hits home to me. I mean, it hits home to me. I'm not saying that to you. I'm looking in my own mirror. I'm looking in my own mirror and longing to more faithfully do that. So if you've got an outline or you're looking at this, wait, go back. Go back, Ty, can you? This is the challenge. Here's the question. If nothing, and really, we should take 3 or 4 weeks to really chew through this, because this question is the key question. How, right, in our world today, how to be immediately recognized as a follower of Jesus Christ and yet welcome into every setting. Do you think it's possible? I think that's what Jesus is challenging. This is the red letter challenge of Luke 6, I believe. Because look at what Jesus says. Here's the economy you're working under. Somebody pops you in the face, you pop them back. Eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth. Somebody cheats you, how dare you ever be so stupid as to loan them money again? If somebody does this to you, a Roman had every right, Roman soldier could stop you, any Jew, stop them and say they were required by law to carry their pack 1 mile. In Matthew, Jesus says, carry it 2. If someone takes your coat, make sure they get your shirt also. I am telling you, what Jesus is saying is, this is what I'm longing for. You want to be immediately recognized as a Christ follower? Those are the marks, is what Jesus is saying. The next one is harder, and how to be welcomed into every group, not as a sucker or a patsy or a naive deer in headlights. Isn't that the challenge? Would you agree with me? I don't know. How can I be because I got all my stories. I bet you got them. I worked in the Multnomah Athletic Club in Portland for a year and a half, and one day a coworker found me praying silently over my meal, probably in 10 seconds, right? Hoping no one would notice. And he comes to me and he says, "You're a Christian?" A year and a half. I am so embarrassed by that. I am just horrified that was the case. And we can use all kinds of excuses. Well, I work in a place where I could never say that, or this or that, whatever it is. You can do whatever. I don't want to start an argument. We can't talk about that in my family. We can't do this or that. So this is the hard question. How to be immediately recognized as a follower of Jesus Christ, and yet people love to see you coming. And that's what I think this is. If we want to take notes, two things. I got to make sure I don't talk too long. First thing. The first one is to be pious or pagan. To be pious or pagan. This is what Jesus is wrestling with. Because what Jesus has is two audiences. He has one group of people, the Pharisees, who have decided we're going to be more holy than everyone else. And Jesus hammers on them. But there's another group of people, and I would call them often modern-day Lutherans, who are also very happy to say, you know what? I'm going to be invisible, and no one's going to know I'm a Christian. I'm going to do whatever I want all week long. I'm going to show up on Sunday and say, "Oh, God, I'm really sorry," and then go back to doing whatever I want. My language, my behavior, what I watch, what I do, how my attitudes towards life, how I treat others, I am indistinct from anybody else next to me. Nobody would ever know. And Jesus is speaking to both ends of that spectrum. How do we go in the middle? And here's where I think it starts. And you can debate with me. You could disagree with me, but I'm going to pose this and see what you think. Because here's what I think Jesus is doing. This is what I tell you. Those who hear me, love your enemies, do good to those who hate you, bless those who curse you, pray for those who mistreat you. Here's the point. Because when we get this wrong, we are defining people by their behavior. Right? That person is my enemy. Therefore, this is how I treat them. That person doesn't agree with me. Therefore, I demonize them. That person and I don't see eye to eye. Therefore, I waste no time on them. Get it? Because of their behavior, I have considered them of no value. And Jesus Christ, I think, is pierced through the heart every time we do that. Now, don't get me wrong on this. Are there behaviors that are ungodly? I know them well. I'm good at them. I don't know if you are. I am. I'm good at a lot of them. And there are lots of behaviors that are ungodly and unpleasing to God and take us farther away from true relationship with Christ. But it is not my job to define a person by their behavior. Rather, it is my task as one who has been valued by Christ, not because of my behavior, but simply because he died in my place and carried my sin, for me to value you and every other human being I see in the same manner. I believe this is the start. I believe that's the start. That's why Jesus says those radical words. You have defined people by their behavior. If they're your enemy, you get to treat them this way. If they curse you, you get to treat them this way. And he says, no more. Because that's not how I value people. That's a hard word, folks. That's a hard word because so often behavior is what we got. Right? Behavior is how we got. And don't get me wrong on this either. I'm not talking about everybody become a sucker and everybody become stupid with their money. And I hope you get what I'm saying, is that when we value people by behavior, now it leads to being a Pharisee or a pagan or a hedonist. But rather, when we value people, when we define people because they have been valued by Christ, and that's the mark. When we define people by their value in Christ, we become family. People who you never imagined being family with. By the way, look through the room. There's a few hundred people here you never imagined you'd be family with, and you are. And so we value people because they're family. And because, in that case, right, you don't kick your kids out of your house because of behavior. over and over and over and over. There may come a moment. I get it. There's tough love moments. I get that. I get that. But you don't throw them out because they swore. You don't throw them out because they were mean to you or they talked back to you. You don't throw them out. It doesn't mean you excuse it. Doesn't mean, but you don't define your kids by that. You do not define your spouse, your family members by behavior. We define them by their value in Christ. Second thing. So I'm here in Phoenix, and Phoenix has just grown like nuts. And I used to go down a lot. My parents lived in Sun City. I'd go to spring training out in Peoria and Glendale and those areas, Surprise. And then we're downtown, and the airport is monstrous now and just convoluted mess. And so I got to use my GPS. But I don't like GPS. I mean, I like it fine. It gets me where I need to, but I don't like it. I like to know where I'm driving. So after a couple tries, then I turn off the GPS and I go, let me see if I can find the airport. And so I do pretty good. My sense of direction is not bad. Hey, stop laughing. Hey, my sense of direction is really good. So I'm going to the airport, right? And so normally, if I kind of silence my GPS, that's the first step. Silence the GPS, and then just kind of drive, and then kind of look down in it once in a while. And if I've made a wrong turn, they'll say, up ahead, hang a left, and we'll take this other road, right? It's a kind of a course correction. But if I turned off my GPS, so for instance, I turned off my GPS, and I got really embarrassingly, hopelessly lost. And when I turned it back on, essentially it says this: make a U-turn, you idiot. You know, I mean, seriously, what it said was, make an immediate U-turn. Have you ever gotten that command? No, never? Yeah, I have. Okay, make an immediate U-turn. Anyway, that's the interesting thing that I think Jesus is also calling us to try to answer that question. How can I be immediately recognized as a follower of Jesus and yet welcome in any group? The first one is how we value people. The second one is, are we honest with ourselves? Do I need a course correction, or do I need an immediate U-turn? I've been a pastor for 25 years. I still need to make lots of U-turns. Fair? I still need to make lots of U-turns. Where I have been heading in the wrong direction, I need to stop and turn. Let me give you a story. Last day of the conference, there's this guy. He had a lifelong dream since the time he was a teenager to be a missionary overseas. Go to Africa, be a missionary. Awesome. He admired lots of people in his life who were blessed to be able to do that work, and he began trying to save his money. His family didn't have any money. He'd mow lawns. He did work, part-time work, started saving money. And along the way, it was really interesting. He was one of the presenters, and he was sharing this. And he said, you know, I'd get to a few $1,000s, and my pastor would come to me and say, hey, we've got somebody over here. There's his family. You know, could you help him out? And he'd help him out. And he'd start working again, start building up his reserve. And he said, man, 18 years went by, and I still never got to do that dream. And I was in tears one day talking to my pastor about it. And my pastor stopped, and he pulled out a sheet, and on it he had written all the families and lives that he had touched in the last 18 years with the nearly $45,000 that he had contributed to those families. And the pastor said to him, if God had blessed you to go overseas, that would have been wonderful, wouldn't it? But he said, God called you right here and you didn't even know it. God called you right here and you didn't even know it. And this is my point. When we make a U-turn, that is a blessing. It is not, do not take it as a condemnation on the direction you were going. Take it as an affirmation that what God has done is said, I need you to listen only to my voice. See, far too often with course corrections, it's me talking, and I want God to kind of give me some extra advice. And in a U-turn, God says, you shut up now, because I need to take over. And that's when God does his best work, when we stop and allow him to be exactly who he is. Now, I need to keep working through this real quickly. Last couple things. And so Jesus is challenging us, saying, so therefore, what will be your foundation? I laugh about this. Teresa and I are laughing about it. We're working on a little bit of a renovation project, and I got to do some framing. And I said, you know, it's funny, when we do a big project over here, high school, or we're building something, whenever there's framing to be done, and I put the call out, I get 35 guys. All these dudes love to frame. Give me a hammer, whack, 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 whack. You know, saws and hammers, we're doing. Then I say, okay, let's hang some sheetrock. Goes down to 15. Then I go, hey, let's do some mud. Goes down to 2, right? You know, all of those volunteers, oh, I'm not bad back, I can't, I got, you know. But framing, yeah, we're there, you know, because you can see that sucker rise right out of the ground, and in 3 hours, you got yourself a structure. It is hard work to work on those things. Now, imagine if I put out a call and say, you know what, we need to grind down the foundation, fill some cracks. I'd probably have to hire out, because nobody wants to do that. Nobody sees it. It's under the water line, so to speak. It's below ground level, but it's the most important part you can do. And that's what Jesus is saying here. The person who comes to me, hears my words, puts them into practice, they're the ones working on the foundation. They're the ones working below ground level, below the water line. And that's the joy, because finally, in the end, go to the next one, Ty. When our foundation is Christ, our house stands. Why? For this, hungry for his word. Here's the foundation. When we're hungry for his word, Lord, feed me. Give me the word. Give me your promise. I may not always love it. I may not always like it, but I know it's true, and I know you love me. And so I want to be hungry for his word. I want to be thirsty for the meal that we're going to share together. I'm longing, Lord, for you to feed me for that with the forgiveness of sins. And then finally, I want to be, Lord, relentless in applying grace in my own life and in grace in the lives of others. And here's the good news of this. Because when that is happening as followers of Christ, our eyes are open and we discover that he is doing exactly the same thing. For he is hungry, eager to be the living word in you. He is excited and filled with joy to invite you to his table today so that you will know his grace. I have longed to have this meal with you, Jesus says, and he is relentless in every time you seek him by faith for the forgiveness of sins. He always says yes. May that be our foundation to the glory of God. Amen.